Greetings and welcome to Yarnspirations. I'm Mary Beth Temple for Hooked for Life, and in this video we're going to take a closer look at the diagonal Basketweave knit stitch pillow. Now this is knit in Bernat Velvet, and you can click on the link below to download the free pattern. And while you're down there, please subscribe to the channel for fresh content weekly on knitting, crocheting, and other yarny stuff. Now this is a 4-row repeat. It's got some interesting texture to the pattern when you're all finished with it. And then we're going to learn how to make this separate loopy fringe, which is actually a really super fun technique, and I can't wait to share it with you. So let's get going on our pillow. So the first thing I want to talk about, oddly enough, is the cast on. And it tells you with the larger needles to cast on 117 stitches. Now, when you put your first row in, which is simply a knit row, your first instinct is going to be, holy Pete, that is way too wide. Somebody made a typo. This is insane. This is wrong. I'm here to tell you it's not a typo and it's not wrong. When you get going in the pattern stitch, the fabric is going to pull in width by a pretty big percentage. So when you cast on your 117 and you knit them, don't panic if it looks too wide to you. That's the first thing I wanted to point out. And then there's going to be some abbreviations that we're not real familiar with, but we're going to go over those. So it's a 4-row repeat, 2 through 5. You're going to repeat over and over again. But we're going to start from the very beginning because, again, it looks a little unusual when you get started. And once you get a few rows on it, it's a lot more intuitive and you can see what you're doing, but you can get a little worried when you get started. So I wanted to show you from the very beginning. Also, just to point out, I'm using bigger needles than that those which are called for, and that is because I want you to really see what I'm doing. So you follow the instructions, but I want you to see what it looks like. So on my second row, I'm going to purl 3, 1, 2, 3, and then it says SL1PWYIF, which is slip 1 purlwise with yarn in front. So my yarn's already in the front because I'm purling. So honestly, all I'm going to do is slip 1 purlwise, and then I'm going to go to the next stitch and purl 2. So it's a long abbreviation, but basically it's slip 1 purlwise with yarn in front, and my yarn's already in front, so I don't have to do anything. So slip 1 purlwise with yarn in front, purl 2. Repeat from asterisk to end of row. My piece is much shorter than yours will be, just in the interest of speed. So when you're bringing your working yarn from here to the next stitch, watch your gauge. As I said, it is going to pull in widthwise, but you don't want to make it worse by really tugging on it when you bring it across. So I just try and keep it in the gauge that I'm working in. I don't go crazy pulling it too tight, and I don't make it too loose. Slip 1 purlwise with yarn in front, which is where it already is. And we're going to do that all the way to the end of the row. So I did row 1 off camera, which was just a knit row, and I did the second row just now. So no basket weaving going on yet, but here's where the magic happens. Okay, we're on the third row, and it says knit 2, 1, 2. Slip next stitch onto cable needle and leave at front of work. Now I like these curvy ones. If you have seen other videos that I've done here on Yarnspirations, you know these are my favorite, but you can use the straight ones with the bump in the middle. You could use a double pointed needle. Whatever you want to use is fine, but I like these curvy ones so I can just literally drop them and they don't go anywhere. So I did knit 2, slip next stitch onto cable needle and leave it front of work. So I've slipped it onto the cable needle and I'm going to drop it. Now it says knit 2, knit 1, knit 2, Slip stitch from cable needle onto right hand needle without working it. Repeat from asterisk to last stitch. So I'm going to bring this guy up. And I'm going to put it on the right hand needle without working it. And I also want to make sure it doesn't twist. If you always put it on the needle with the short side and take it off on the long side, it won't twist. If you make sure that you are using your cable needle like this. If you twist the cable needle, the stitch is going to twist. At the end of the day, it's not going to be horrible if you have a twist here or there, but I prefer how the stitch looks without it, so I'm trying not to do that. So I'm going back to the asterisk, so here we go again. Slip stitch onto cable needle, leave in front of work. Knit 2, 1, 2, bring stitch from cable needle up, put it on the right hand needle without working it. So we're not knitting that stitch. And then we're going to get that cable needle and go to the next guy. Put a stitch on the cable needle, leave in front of work, knit 2, 1, 2, bring my friend up here, put it on the right hand needle without working it, put the next guy on the cable needle. So you're going to do this all the way across. There will be one stitch left, and that will be a knit 1. Here I am with the third row completed, and you can see these stitches that have been lifted up off those cable needles. You can see that's getting my first, the little crisscross in the basket weave is beginning. So that is the end of the third row. Moving on to the fourth row, which is a wrong side row. It's very similar to the second row, but in this case we're going to purl 2 to start, not purl 3 like we did the other time. 2, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in front, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in front, purl 2, 1, 2, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in front. So it's very similar to how we did the other row. Now I noticed when I was practicing this stitch off camera that sometimes it's really easy to push 2 stitches together and feel like they're one. So make sure, and the only place that I had that problem was on this fourth row. So make sure when you get to the end of the fourth row that you have the same number of stitches that you started with. It's definitely worth counting. Because this is not a stitch that you want to get way far away from and then realize you have to rip back. See what I mean? How these two are really close to each other? But I have to split those apart and realize that they're 2 different stitches, or else my count is going to be wacky. So we did that to the last 3 stitches. We're going to purl 3. 1, 2, 3. Sorry about that clunking noise. Okay, so this is what it looks like at the end of the fourth row, and I flipped it around so once again we're looking at the right side. Okay, let's take a look at that fifth row. We're going to knit 1, slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back twice. Once again, the yarn is already in the back, so the yarn is where I want it to be. So I'm slipping 1 purlwise with yarn in back once, slipping 1 purlwise with yarn in back twice, slip next stitch onto cable needle and leave it front of work. So once again, I like to start with the short side, but that's my habit. You can go the other way if that works better for you. So we've slipped that stitch onto the cable needle and leave it the front of the work. Now, slip 2 stitches back onto left-hand needle. So these 2 that we slipped, we're putting them back on the left-hand needle. Slip stitch from cable needle onto right-hand needle without working it. So now it's back on the right-hand needle. Knit 2. So the 2 that we're knitting are those stitches that we were moving. 1, 2. And then we're going back to the asterisk, right? Slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back where it already is twice. 1, 2. Slip next stitch onto cable needle and leave it in the front. Move the 2 stitches that you slipped from the right hand needle to the left hand needle. Bring the stitch that was on the cable needle up to the right hand needle and leave it unworked. Knit 2. 1, 2. One more time. Slip 1 purlwise with yarn in back twice. 1, 2. Slip next stitch onto cable needle and leave in front of work. That's our guy. Slip 2 stitches back onto the left hand needle. 1, 2. Slip stitch from cable needle onto right hand needle without working it. Here's my 1. Knit 2. 1, 2. So now you can see our basket weave is really getting going. And you can also see how much width I have lost from stitching. So once again, when you do that cast on and it looks too wide to you, I promise you it's not. You're going to lose a lot of width once you get this first repeat on. So you're going to repeat the information between those asterisks and you will have 2 stitches remaining at the end. Knit 2. From here on out, you're going to repeat the 2nd through the 5th rows to form the basket weave pattern, continuing until work from beginning measures 24 inches or 61 centimeters and cast off. So I am going to put just a few more rows on this so you can really see how the pattern develops up close and personal. And then after that, we're going to move on to the fringe. Now I've done a few more repeats of the stitch. You can really see the basket weave coming up. The other thing I want to say is after you've gotten through a few repeats, it really does become a lot more intuitive. You can see what you're doing. And that's the case with a lot of stitch patterns in knitting and crocheting out in the world. Once you have them set up, you can relax a little bit because you can see what you're doing from one minute to the next. But this is what it looks like on the right side of the work. And this is what it looks like on the wrong side of the work. So let's take a look at the fringe. With the smaller needles, again I'm using the bigger ones for visual aids sake. With the smaller needles, cast on 7 stitches. So here's the right side row is knit front and back. So knit in the front of the stitch. Do not push it off the left hand needle. Knit in the back of the stitch. Knit 2 together. Knit 2 together. Knit 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the wrong side rows. Go knit 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, knit front and back, 1 in the front, don't push it off, 1 in the back, push it off, knit 2 together. So even though you have increases and decreases, you're only ever going to have 7 stitches in your row. Now here comes the fun part. So you're going to repeat these last 2 rows until the work from the beginning measures 11 inches or 28 centimeters, ending with a wrong side row. And there's more instructions about how it's going to grow a little bit when it's unraveled, but this is how the fringe happens, and it just amuses me greatly. This is one of my favorite things to do. So we're going to cast off 2 stitches. One, 2. Fasten off stitch on the right hand needle, that's this guy. So I'm just going to cut my yarn. Pull that through to fasten it off. Now slip remaining 4 stitches off needles and unravel every row to create the looped fringe. So this is the fun part. Just take them right off the needle and pull it apart. As always, your piece will be a little bit bigger than mine is. But again, I just love the idea of this. So now here you have the part of it that you can stitch onto the pillow, but now you have these really cool looped fringes that are all approximately the same size because they were all the same amount of stitches. So it's just a fun technique. I really sort of get a charge out of doing that. So I hope you enjoyed it too. So thank you so much for joining us here on Yarnspirations for the Diagonal Basketweave Knit Stitch Pillow. Please be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for fresh content weekly on knitting, crocheting, and other yarny stuff. I'm Mary Beth Temple for Hooked for Life. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye-bye.